Thank you, everyone who's still with us online, everyone who came out tonight. My name is Gira Grant. I'm a staff writer at the New Republic. I am so happy that we're going to have this conversation. Let me rewrite that. I wish we did not have to have this conversation, which is something I often feel in everything that I write. But here we are. I can't think of anything more critical as we're heading into this very difficult year than affirming our rights to free expression. So I'm going to very briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then we're just going to dive right in. Right next to me, I have Emerson Sykes, Senior Staff Attorney, ACLU Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, Suzanne Nossel, CEO of PEN America, and Peter Osnos, founder of PublicAffairs Books. So even just thinking about how to start having this conversation, because there's so many different kinds of threats to free expression, so many censorship campaigns, so many people pushing book bans, even though they're deeply unpopular. I was wondering if each of you in turn could shine a light on an example that you're particularly concerned about. It's such a diverse and broad set of problems that we're talking about, and I feel like this is the only way to really lay that out in the beginning.
You want me to start? For me, it's not a single example. It's sort of the spiraling vicious circle that we are in, which involves a kind of soft but serious censoriousness emanating from the left, where there's a kind of pall of orthodoxy that has set in on certain college campuses, where people feel they can't express controversial views or even discuss, say, topics like abortion or immigration or affirmative action for fear of being labeled as a bigot or racist or stigmatized, having those comments follow them through their careers, not being able to shake a statement you might make early in life. And so there's this chilling effect that we do see on college campuses and in the classroom. We've heard from professors who say people won't even engage in a discussion. They have to assign roles and say, you play Scalia, you play Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because nobody will actually raise their hand and give a genuine opinion. So there's that. But in response to that, over the last few years, we have seen an astonishing wave of out-and-out government-sponsored censorship. And it goes far beyond, trying to push back to a place of free speech. It is silencing. There are book bans. There are what we call at PEN America, what we've labeled educational gag orders, which are prohibitions dictating from the legislature what can and can't be taught in a college or high school classroom. There are educational intimidation bills. That's something that requires that a teacher, say, just put up all their lesson plans and readings on a website so anyone can see, not just the parents, but any citizen in the community. Sounds innocent. It's transparency, right? Except, what are they doing? They're also empowering individual citizens to challenge any reading that may upset or offend them. So it's a direct effort to circumscribe what the teachers are going to assign, what they're going to talk about in the classroom for fear of being disciplined or even losing their jobs. And there's more to it. There are new things all the time. Attacks on tenure, a real strike right now at the heart of the role and independence of the university. And we see this at Harvard with the very unfortunate, kind of sad situation and complex that has unfolded. But there are people who are using that opening to try to fundamentally remake the place of higher education in our society, discredit it, funnel money that goes toward public schools, toward private education. And so that spiral really has to be broken. And at the moment, it's only kind of escalating and intensifying.
Do you guys want to jump in briefly?
Yeah. Well, let me say that the eloquence of all the previous people that you've heard from, they're all really strong and very persuasive advocates. I come at it slightly differently. I'm a journalist, I'm a book publisher. I started reading the New Republic before most of you were born, 1965, 66. And while we're here to wring our hands a bit, let's face it, New Republic's been around a long time. It's been doing amazing work for all those years, and we're here tonight because the New Republic wants us to be talking to you about the issues of the day. So I would like to start by saying thank you to Wynn and the two Michaels and so on for the New Republic generally. My basic view on the Bill of Rights and the Ten Commandments has become that they are subject to interpretation. That one of the lessons that we have learned in recent years is that people take positions sort of based on where they find themselves in life and circumstances. And the problem is trying to be absolutist on any of them, because given the way the democracy works, that's very hard. So we always are going to be in some measure of controversy over each of the individual rights. I give you adultery in the Ten Commandments. I give you the Second Amendment. So what we need to be, perhaps in a way that I think is particularly important, and again, right now when we're in the sort of state of affairs that we are, let's try and look at things in less of a very kind of narrow perspective, try to understand what it is about the Bill of Rights, what it is, less so about the Ten Commandments, but what it is about the Bill of Rights that is at risk, and how we best can go about supporting the things that for whatever reasons we want to support, and trying to deal with the people who don't agree with us.
I guess this is what I get for going last, right? So all the good stuff was taken. But what I think, just to add on, I mean, there were lots of lawyers on the previous panels, but I think I'm the only litigator on this panel. So I'll go straight and directly answer your question. The thing that I am most worried about at the moment, this very instant, in addition to all the things that have been mentioned, are the efforts through speech to erase certain folks from polite political life. And so at the pointy end of the spear at the moment is the LGBTQ community, and particularly drag performances. But the LGBTQ community is implicated in the book bans, the educational gag orders, all of the things that have been mentioned already. But there's a very specific effort underway that we and others have been pushing back against, targeting drag performances. And it seems like a petty thing, it seems like a small thing, it's trivial, it's people dressing up and having fun and dancing and singing. But what it is an effort to decide what kinds of art is allowed, but not just what kinds of art, but what kinds of expression, what kinds of gender expression, and what kinds of being. Some of these laws sweep so broadly that they don't just ban performance in drag, but they ban any sort of gender expression that doesn't accord with someone's gender assigned at birth. So there's so much going on, there's so many ways of approaching the issue, but I wanted to flag that one as it's at the top of my desk at the moment.
Literally probably at the top of your desk at the ACLU. It's a free speech panel. I think you both bring up some points in tension with one another, just to mention that before we keep going. This is an issue, the organizations who are pushing the drag bans, they're some of the same people we were talking about earlier when it comes to abortion bans. They're some of the same people who are pushing litigation in the Supreme Court that could be incredibly damaging to our democracy. That group is called Lions Defending Freedom. I think it's really helpful to name the people who have the power in these situations and think about what they are doing with that when they are trying to control people's gender expression, which, sometimes for some people, they might not think that's part of speech and free expression. So just to drop that in. I feel like for a lot of folks, when they come to this current moment specifically, it's like the last 2 or 3 years on questions around censorship and free speech, the idea that we're even having to deal with book banning feels a little preposterous. We know they're very unpopular. Penn has done great research on that, so has ALA. It seems to be a very small group of people who are pushing them. They also seem to be an opportunity for democracy, where communities who are dealing with these book bans are organizing to push back against them. And so I'm really curious, for when we're talking about book bans specifically, it seems like this is a much bigger issue than just books. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak to that. Is there something hidden in there that's getting obscured when we're sort of having these arguments title by title or even theme by theme? As important as it is whose books are being banned, What are we missing kind of more broadly?
Can
That this is
can
a
I
site of
start?
attack.
Since books, pretty much what I do.
Please go
When
ahead.
it comes to book banning, look, there's absolutely no question, none, that every book being banned is being banned for prejudice. I mean, I don't think anybody would challenge that at all. Book bans are not new. Problems in publishing are not new. I mean, I always say that the first book in print was Gutenberg's Bible, and the second one is Publishing is Dead. I mean, we live in a world in which publishing, for all kinds of reasons, and books, because of what they are, always need to be on the defense. What I think we need to understand is I know enough about these little places, these little towns, where the book banning are happening, to know that one way to deal with it is when they ban a book, you mobilize and get that book into people's hands. You can do that. If you want to give $1.25, you can probably get somebody to give you the book, and you can give it to somebody. In other words, don't take the fact that the book is banned in a library to say that it's over, it's gone. No, there are all kinds of ways in which we can get the books. Won't be all that expensive, I promise you. Most publishers will give you the books at, for the price of the printing. And so rather than just throw up our hands in a state of concern or anguish over the fact that book banning exists, always has, but let's make those books available. I'm very much an advocate of finding ways to get people to read books and buy books. The country is reading books. Every year for the last, even in COVID, the percentage of revenue generated by book sales has gone up. Okay, some of it's Britney Spears. But a great deal of it are the books that people want to ban, because sometimes the inverse or the obverse of book banning is to make it a bestseller. That's what happened with Mouse. After years of not being a bestseller, it suddenly became one because people tried to ban it. So think when you can of the positive side of fighting back.
Either of you want to jump in?
Sure. Look, I think, when you ask sort of where does this originate from, I think it's a couple of different threads. I think one piece is the kind of breach of trust and sense of alienation that set in between parents and schools during the pandemic, and the frustrations over learning loss, and a kind of pitched anger that arose in certain communities. There's that piece. A second piece, which Emerson alluded to, is, whether you call it fear, prejudice, or a combination thereof, it's a sense among some people that things are moving too quickly, lifestyles and communities are changing, things people grew up with, that they're accustomed to, that they believe are right, are being challenged or cast out, and that this is happening sort of out of their control, and a sort of desire to kind of grasp back and hold back the tide of change, the tide of a pluralistic society in which there's no one single racial group or gender, or that gender is not a binary, that people are living in different ways. And then what's happened on top of that is just an out-and-out weaponization and a concerted movement. These book bans, this is not about people picking up a backpack at home and saying, this book isn't right for my third grader. It's too explicit. It's dealing with issues of sexuality that are appropriate. That's not what's happening. This is about lists of books that are being passed around from activist to activist in school districts across the country. We see this. They are copying, cutting and pasting the objections to the books they have not read. You can see right down to the typos that it's the same exact complaint about the book, that it's too mature, or it's got sex in it. And that has become a way of waging a culture war, a tactic of political mobilization in some communities, a way to give people a sense that they're kind of pushing back against these trends and tides that they believe are accelerating out of their control. I do want to mention, it's I don't think these power dynamics are entirely binary. We did a report this year, just last year, called Booklash, that was about a different but related phenomenon that really goes to some of the same issues, which is a phenomenon in the publishing industry where books are being pulled, from circulation or withdrawn from publication over objections as to it could be the conduct of the writer. They've done something that sort of puts them out of bounds. They've been canceled. The idea that the person doesn't have the authority or the right to convey a story that it doesn't reflect their own personal identity, that they're kind of committing a cultural trespass by, a white person writing a story about a black community, or a person who's not from Kosovo, in one case, talking about the war that happened there. And it really goes back to the fundamental principle of the freedom to read, that you don't want an online mob on Goodreads inundating people with one-star reviews, to the point where we have some authors who pulled back the books themselves for fear of what they would endure if they went forward with publication. There was an example of a book about sort of revolutionary Russia, and when Ukrainians went after that author and said, "What are you doing talking about this period?" She was intimidated and she pulled back the book. It hasn't been released. And so, that is another form. It's not government censorship, but it is a soft censoriousness, and it does go to kind of these fundamental ideas of the freedom to read and to explore that we need to uphold. And it's in a sense the same fight as we are waging against book banning.
I agree with all that. I think the only thing I would add is another way that I tend to think about it is that it's a struggle over our national narrative. So there's a way in which these are easy political points that people can score. It's sort of red meat for the voting base of whichever side. But I think it makes sense that school classrooms, in particularly higher institutions of higher education, which are have been seen as liberal bastions, public schools where the next generation is taught about who we are as a country, what things we value, what stories we tell. And in addition, in public libraries, what sorts of literature we lift up, what sorts of stories we pass on to our youth. And I think, where this one is about speech, and the most obvious example of this may be around crackdowns on the media. Or sort of at least antipathy towards the media. And so I think the unifying theme and the unifying impulse behind this is an understandable one. As much as I spend all day pushing back against it, and in many ways it's maddening, I think it's about who we are as a people, and we've had decades of progress, right? I grew up with a very whitewashed history presented in schools. I'm sure most people here did. And over the last generation or so, we've had dramatic improvement in the amount of representation of different kinds of stories, a more nuanced picture of how we got to be where we are, and a more honest picture, the good, the bad, and the ugly of our history and of our current society. And as Suzanne said, what we're seeing now is an effort to sort of scrub back out some of these things, to pull back. It's a backlash against this progress. So, and just to your point, Peter, these efforts to get around book bans are ongoing. We are litigating right now in Oklahoma against HB 1775, which prohibited a whole list of concepts from K-12 schools. And there was a librarian in a school who was Summer Boismer, who passed out a QR code for the Brooklyn Public Library to try to get around these book bans, and she lost her job. Thankfully, she now lives in New York. We're happy to have her. But she should,
at the Brooklyn Public Library.
Right, but she should be back in Oklahoma teaching her students, but she's not being allowed to do so.
I want to try to come at this just slightly differently.
You have 60 seconds.
Sorry?
You have 60 seconds. So we can make
In that
sure we can
case,
get
to
back
hell
to
with
the
you.
other
It's
things.
10 minutes. There's still 10 minutes to go. But no,
I know,
seriously,
but go
because
ahead.
what we're hearing is all very, as I say, it's persuasive, but it shows a certain lack of kind of context, to use a terrible word, which now got people into trouble. The fact is, the business is about what books are published. When Simon & Schuster announced that they were going to publish Mike Pence's book, it was met with outrage, even at Simon & Schuster. 2,000 people signed a petition. How dare you publish Mike Pence? My view of it is, Mike Pence was the Vice President of the United States. He has a story. If he wants to publish a book, I'd publish the book if it meets the standards of the other books I publish. And one thing I would not do is give him a penny more than the book earns. Why
So,
would you
no
want to give,
advance.
let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why would you want to give Mike Pence $2 million as a guarantee? That's, as a publisher, and I speak here, in that sense, some credibility, I would publish Mike Pence if he would write a book that I could publish, and I would insist on it, and I would give him only what the book earned. And I think what we have to recognize is that books are ultimately a commodity in the marketplace. And we need to understand how the marketplace works. So let's not make a completely artificial, I will not publish somebody with whom I disagree. I would publish somebody with whom I disagree if they published a book that I would publish, and I wouldn't give them a penny more than they earned.
We could get into a whole publishing thing, but I wish we could, honestly, because I feel like you're the person I'd want to talk about it. But in the interest of making the most of the time that we have left, we've actually kind of hit on this question around, there's different tactics people take when they defend free expression. And I think one tactic is to say, look, like, it's just a book. It's like not going to make somebody queer, or it's like not going to do racial reparations by being published. It's not that important, so don't get that upset about it. You guys are overreacting. And I think people who are organizing against book bans sometimes get told they're overreacting. This is just a culture war. It's a distraction. But what that crystallizes for me is we have to be defending something more than the book when we're doing this. And you alluded to this in the beginning, that what this often comes down to is a defense of the people for whom the book is a proxy to exclude them from public life and our politics. So I'm wondering if, just to wrap things up, if each of you could take a second and talk about sort of what is really being defended when we're defending a banned book.
Can I
Go
take
ahead.
this one first?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a great question. The idea that we have this idea of free speech where we want to defend speech for its own sake, which we might call sort of an intrinsic value of free speech, but then there's the instrumental value of free speech, and I think we can hold both at the same time, right? Free speech is important because it's how we bring about social change. It's how we let people who are marginalized have a voice and at least make their case for why things should change, right? So there's an instrumentalist way that you can't have social justice without some degree of free speech, I would argue. And I believe deeply in the project of social justice. And free speech has its own value. I come from an international human rights background. If you start from a place of individual human equality, and we all have rights by virtue of being human, including the right to our own ideas and our own expression, then we can, if that's our starting point, then we can get into how it affects other people. But I think it's important not just to hold on to the instrumentalist value, right? Because that's very important. It's how we get change done. But there is an inherent intrinsic value to free speech as well that is born primarily, or at least in the context of the First Amendment, which limits government action. It's not the only thing about free speech. We've been talking about non-government censorship a lot. But when it comes to the First Amendment, what we're primarily worried about is restricting government's authority to regulate private ideas. So in that way, it is especially important when you're limiting power to not only care about free speech when it's people you agree with, because it's the authority of the government that can be wielded against you or against anyone at any time.
Look, I think that's right. A couple of other dimensions that are salient to our work at PEN America. We work with authors, and so watching how authors endure this, and you're right, some Art Spiegelman, Mouse becomes a bestseller when it gets banned, but overwhelmingly these books are by, many of them are by new authors, they're by authors of color, LGBTQ authors. They're not famous. They're not having a surge in sales. These people make their living going into schools with appearances and bookstores and events. That dries up when they become controversial and untouchable. People question whether they can be included in a book fair. And it's devastating to somebody who's built their life on self-expression and telling stories to be curtailed in that way. And then there's the side, of course, of the reader. And these books, some of the books at stake here, honestly, are explicit. I mean, you would look at them and you would say, wow, like this is intense. I don't know how I feel about even my own kid necessarily reading this, or what would be the right age. But what we hear time and again from librarians and teachers is that for certain kids, these books are life-saving. Finding a narrative, if you're living in a rural community and your parents are not going to accept your identity and there's nobody at the school, there are no role models, finding a book on the shelf where you can see someone like yourself and see that there's a future can be that which keeps you alive and allows you to move forward in life. And I'd say just something else that kind of goes to, I think, Peter, what you're saying, which is the role of our schools, the role of our libraries in knitting together this pluralistic society. We live overwhelmingly still in segregated communities. These are the places where we meet one another. We learn about someone unlike ourselves. A book is the key to unlock empathy. Suddenly you read a story, you're inside the head of a character who's somebody who's lived a very different life than your own, and you could see things from a different perspective, or recognize that that person on the street may have had a tough life experiences, and that's why they're treating you the way that they do. And so that the free flow of ideas and stories in our schools, in our libraries, in the shelves of our publishing houses and bookstores, I think is absolutely crucial. We don't want a world where heavy-handed legislators are dictating every book that can be read, or even where teachers are saying, these are the half dozen books to read. We want a world full of shelves where you can pick and choose, whether it's Amy Coney Barrett or Mike Pence or Ketanji Brown Jackson, whoever you want to read about, whatever life story is going to inspire you, that you have a chance of finding that, whatever ideas are going to captivate you or challenge you, that you can explore those. That's, I think, an underpinning of democracy and of our kind of freewheeling society, artistic freedom, scientific progress. And so that's, to me, what's at stake when we defend against book bans.
Peter, will you bring us home? You've got the last word.
It says 1 minute and 51 seconds. I'm just going to read something, if
Please
you don't
do.
mind.
Go ahead.
All right? Because you asked us to be concise, and so I wrote it down. So the threat to democracy is human dysfunction. Let's face it. We can't help the fact that democracy is inherently divisive. That's the way it's made. We have to know how to manage democracy by using tactics and sort of strategic belief. There are two people who are always quoted. One is Yogi Berra, and the other one is Winston Churchill. And Churchill actually said this: "Many forms of government have been tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." He said that in November of 1947. Yes, our democracy is, at the moment, in some state of disarray, dysfunction. But it is the democracy that we must somehow believe in. And when we hear the despairing that we hear so much of, I think we lose sight of the fact that there is a democracy that's worth supporting and believing in. And books obviously are essential to that, and good books are essential to that. And when somebody tells you you can't read it, God damn it, go out and read it. That's what you can do. And we can do that in the way we vote and the way we put positions into play, which Penn and ACLU and everybody does so well. It's one of the greatnesses of our democracy. So there.
Do not despair the imperfect democracy, essentially. It's all we've got. I want to thank our incredible panel again. This was a huge conversation. You did very well. Thank you.
Thank you.